The afternoon sun poured into the drawing room of the quaint Willowbrook Manor, casting long shadows that danced across the plush, velvet seating. Its inhabitants were aptly described as an eccentrically charming assembly gathered for the annual tea and treasure soirée. Lady Beatrice Pemberton, a formidable matron known for her mismatched pearls and roguish chortles, presided over the gathering with the air of a self-appointed queen. She adored the drama of life, and today promised to deliver its fair share. The guests included Mr. Horace Tyndall, a retired army officer with a penchant for stiff upper lips and a decidedly cadaverous complexion, Miss Clara Worthington, a starry-eyed novelist who constantly scribbled in a worn leather notebook, and Professor Julian Brigg, an academic with round spectacles perched precariously on his nose, and an insatiable curiosity that bordered on the obsessive. They were soon joined by the dapper and ever-enthusiastic Inspector Gideon Hartley, summoned to provide the official touch of authority to this gathering of social elites. As teacups clinked and the scent of Earl Grey wafted through the room, the guests indulged in spirited conversation, exchanging stories and laughter over delectable scones. But beneath the surface of amiability lay an undercurrent of tension, for the evening held a secret, one that Lady Beatrice was not yet ready to reveal. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the jovial atmosphere. All heads turned toward the doorway, where the timid figure of Mrs. Agnes Thompson, the housekeeper, stood with eyes wide and features pale. It's Lady Beatrice!" she gasped, clutching the doorknob as if it anchored her to reality. The room erupted into a flurry of activity. The guests rose, their previous gaiety swallowed in an instant by dread. Inspector Hartley was the first to rush past Mrs. Thompson, his instincts honed by years of experience. He found Lady Beatrice sprawled on the floor of her study, a letter opener protruding grotesquely from her side, her once vibrant visage now ashen and silent. "The letter opener," he murmured, his eyes scanning the room for clues. Was it an accident, or did she invite her killer? Panic gripped the assembly as they gathered in the drawing room, led by the inspector, who quickly assumed command. "Ladies and gentlemen, I must ask you to remain calm. No one can leave the premises until we have determined the nature of this tragedy." As he spoke, he noted their expressions: anguish, shock, and a touch of agitation. Mr. Tyndall fidgeted with his collar, sweat beading on his brow, while Miss Worthington clutched her notebook as if it were a lifeline. Professor Brigg stared into the distance, contemplating a world where one's fate could be sealed in a single moment of malice. "We shall start with the facts," Inspector Hartley said, his voice steady amidst the turmoil. "Who last spoke to Lady Beatrice, and what were her last known actions?" "I had gone to fetch her favourite china set for tea," Mrs. Thompson managed, her voice trembling as she recounted the earlier moments of the afternoon. "I left her alone, discussing some new investment with Mr. Tyndall." Mr. Tyndall gave a start. "Investment?" "I merely suggested she reconsider her ventures, nothing more." "Is that so?" Hartley asked, raising an eyebrow. "And how do you know it was nothing more? Was she displeased with your advice?" "Of course not!" Tyndall spluttered, his voice betraying a hint of defensiveness. "Lady Beatrice was always a wise woman. She'd made her fortune through careful planning. Yet here we are," the inspector interrupted. "What do the rest of you recall? Miss Worthington? Professor Brigg?" Clara's brow furrowed as she spoke. "I was in the library, gaining inspiration for my latest novel. You understand, the lonely housekeeper trope is terribly appealing." She glanced around, swallowing her nerves. "But I heard nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual sounds of the manor." Brigg adjusted his spectacles, speaking hesitantly. "I was examining the paintings in the hallway. I lost track of time, I must admit. They have a rather mesmerizing quality, don't you think?" "Enough distractions," Hartley barked, piecing together the timeline. "Mrs. Thompson, you left Beatrice with Tyndall for a brief moment. Did you notice anyone else that might have entered the study?" "No, sir," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. It was just the three of us, her, Mr. Tyndall, and me. 3 is an interesting number, the inspector murmured, slipping into a contemplative silence. 3 suspects, after all. He glanced at Clara, who seemed keen to bolt, and then at Tyndall, whose demeanour had shifted from anxious to agitated. Professor Brigg, he said, turning to the academic, I would like to know more about the nature of Lady Beatrice's research. Was she dabbling into anything that might have disturbed someone? Brigg inhaled deeply, the wheels of thought turning behind his eyes. She was quite passionate about the history of this manor. I dare say she uncovered some rather unsavoury details about its past. I'm not aware of any potential enemies, but it wouldn't be surprising if someone took offence. Hartley nodded thoughtfully, absorbing the clues. And what of the estate? Any valuable art or heirlooms that could have provoked jealousy? A few, certainly, Brigg replied, a touch of pride tinging his voice. But Lady Beatrice was meticulous in managing her assets. Any threat from within these walls would be unexpected. The inspector turned to Clara. Miss Worthington, were you aware of any rivalries among the guests? Perhaps someone harboured ill will? Clara hesitated, her hands shaking slightly as she scribbled furiously in her notebook. I think Beatrice had concerns about Tyndall's business dealings. She was quite protective of her investments. Tyndall protested vehemently. That is unequivocally false. I wanted to help her. Those investments were sound. If only she would have listened to my advice. Or perhaps you wish to take control of her fortune, Clara snapped, her eyes glinting with fear and anger. All right, Hartley interrupted, raising a hand for silence. We must avoid becoming a spectacle of accusations. Let us proceed logically. I want to examine the study. The group shuffled behind Hartley as he led them into the dimly lit room, its mahogany furniture towering over them like silent sentinels. The sight of Lady Beatrice's lifeless body sent another wave of trepidation through the ranks. Every object seemed to hold a whisper of her last moments. Hartley approached the desk, noting a half-finished letter lying open, the ink still wet and smudged. He leaned down to read the words, frowning as he absorbed their implication. Abandoning decorum, he called over the group. It appears Lady Beatrice was corresponding with someone she intended to meet. But who? Why, that's curious, said Brigg, peering over Hartley's shoulder. It seems to suggest an urgency she was keen to underscore. Perhaps it was someone close. Perhaps someone whose interests were contrary to her own. The inspector took a step back, considering the implications. Tyndall, what do you know of this letter? I can't say I have ever seen it before, he replied, though his voice was clipped, revealing the strain he felt under scrutiny. Perhaps it's merely a business correspondence. Perhaps, Hartley mused. But our business today is unravelling the circumstances of a murder. As he scanned the gloom of the study, a flash of colour caught his attention. A turn of a vase on the mantelpiece. Is that a bouquet? He queried, noticing the vivid red petals standing defiantly among the pale decor. Beatrice loved fresh flowers, Clara said, her voice subdued. Her late husband adored sending them. Hartley stepped closer, examining the vase. Yet these flowers are remarkably fresh for this time of year. Where might they have come from? Could they be a gift? Brigg conjectured. Perhaps from a suitor, or someone who wished to impress her. Or someone who sought to poison her, Hartley interjected sharply, a detail sparking in his mind. Mrs. Thompson, when did you last see that particular bouquet? Earlier today, I believe. I provided the flowers last evening. I keep a small garden behind the manor, and I thought they might brighten her mood. Needlessly brightened now, Tyndall muttered bitterly. It would appear you all wish to speculate, yet none of us chose to end her life. As the group exchanged uneasy glances, the inspector's brow furrowed in thought, piecing the puzzle together. An intriguing mix of motives, opportunities, and emotions, more tangled than he wished to untangle. A sudden idea ignited. "I would like to confirm the origin of those flowers," he declared. "And in addition, I wish to speak with the rest of the staff. They may have seen something important." He returned to the drawing room, but his mind raced as he summoned everyone to sit. "In the meantime, I'd appreciate if you might each recall your interactions with Lady Beatrice in the past few days. Were there any disputes, questions, or disagreements? Anything at all?" The silence stretched, tension tightening around the group like a noose. Finally, Clara spoke up softly. There was a disagreement between Tyndall and Beatrice over her plans to invest in arts education, a cause she supported fiercely. "Questions of investment seem prevalent," Hartley noted, looking pointedly at Tyndall. "I am not the enemy here," Tyndall cried out, his voice rising in pitch. "Every smart businesswoman knows the value of caution." "Caution? What about reckless ambition? Perhaps she found an opponent to your plans," Brigg challenged, shifting uneasily. "Enough," Hartley interjected. "We have no solid leads yet, but we are running out of time. I can already see how emotions are coloring your judgments. It is important we maintain clarity." After a few more minutes of insistent back and forth, Tyndall produced a small slip of paper, its edges fraying. "I received these during our discussions," he said, holding it up. "They were meant to be sent to Lady Beatrice. I thought they contained vital information. Potential threats from her own heart, perhaps." Hartley took the note, glancing over it with a keen eye. It bore a list of names scrawled in a hurried hand, alongside a warning about a potential business conflict that could ruin Beatrice's investments. "And how long have you had this?" Hartley asked, scrutinizing Tyndall's face for lies. "Only the past few days. I meant to show her, but didn't want to alarm her," Tyndall said, his tone strained as he glanced downwards. "Yet, you didn't think it important to share during her final hours," Clara interjected, her voice rising. "Suspicion lingers. You had motive." Hartley stepped back, taking a slow breath. "And yet, you failed to send a message that could have saved her life, Mr. Tyndall. Perhaps your caution was a cover for something far more sinister." A cacophony erupted, anger merging with fear. Voices rose and fell as accusations flew like daggers. The tension in the room escalated, rippling through the guests until Hartley felt it necessary to step in. "Enough!" he shouted, his authoritative voice booming over the din. "I'm re-establishing order. We can't let this spiral into chaos. Everyone, sit down. We are either going to discover the truth together or allow this tragedy to consume us." In the following hush, a tension seized the room. The inspector paced thoughtfully, retreating to the study again. His instincts were aflame now, leading him toward a conclusion that was tantalizingly close, but still just beyond reach. The pieces were settling into place, yet he couldn't shake the sensation that one more element should be uncovered. "Mrs. Thompson," he called, summoning the housekeeper back into the room. "Your presence is essential. I need you to recount the events of the last few hours." "I've told you everything I know," she said, her voice wavering. "Not quite," Hartley countered. "You've mentioned flowers being brought in, but I need to know if you saw anyone other than the guests tampering with Beatrice's possessions." "Tampering?" she echoed, her brow furrowing. "Did anyone else come and go? Anyone lurking?" He pressed, knowing the urgency now weighed in the balance. "I believe I saw—" She hesitated, biting her lip, then took a deep breath. "There was someone in the garden earlier. A man. I thought it odd, but I thought he was merely a visitor. He seemed to be balancing flowers, perhaps tending to them." "Was he familiar?" Hartley pressed, eyes brightening with realization. "I don't... Well, he may have looked like a gardener, but I didn't get a good look," she said, her trembling hands revealing her anxiety. The gallery fell silent, realization settling like dust in the air. Hartley turned to the group, gesturing for them to focus. We must find this man. He could hold the key to unraveling this web of intrigue. Perhaps he is already here? Tyndall suggested nervously. With new fervour, the inspector organised a search throughout the manor, delegating tasks and instructions. Every nook and cranny needed to be scoured for the gardener, particularly any traces of interaction he might have had with Lady Beatrice before her untimely demise. Hours passed, and just as the shadows grew long, Clara burst into the drawing room, breathless and wide-eyed. "I found him!" she exclaimed. "He was in the greenhouse, acting as if he belonged." "Bring him here," Hartley commanded, his heart racing against the ticking clock. Within moments, a dishevelled man shuffled into the room, his hands stained with earth and eyes darting with apprehension. "I didn't mean to intrude," he stammered, his voice low and rough. "I was just tending to the flowers." "And you are?" Hartley demanded. "David. I tend to the grounds. Beatrice, she loved her flowers," he said, his face flushing under scrutiny. "Did you speak with her recently?" Hartley pressed, not allowing the man's nerves to deflect his focus. "Yes, we spoke briefly about planting new varieties, though she seemed troubled." "I didn't pry, of course," David answered, glancing sideways. "Did you ever overhear anything? Any conversations in the garden?" Hartley asked, sensing urgency. The gardener's eyes clouded with thought. "There was a man, one afternoon, lurking near the hedges. I thought he looked rather dishevelled, scruffy like someone who had been up to no good." The group fell silent, their collective anticipation mounting. "And did you hear anything he said?" David hesitated, then finally said, "He mentioned money. It sounded heated. Something about making demands." "A demand?" Hartley echoed. "What kind of demand? Did you see him again?" "No, sir," David replied, his brow furrowing. "But I was afraid to confront him. I thought I could just report it later." "Later, indeed," Hartley murmured, piecing the final fragments together in his mind. "Who else, David? Were you aware of any visitors that might have met with Beatrice?" David racked his brain, an uncomfortable silence settling once again, before he stammered out, "There were whispers. I overheard Miss Worthington just outside the window one evening. She seemed upset." Clara's face flushed. "That's utterly absurd. I only went out to gather inspiration. Beatrice and I were friends." "Friends?" Tyndall interjected sharply. "I'd wager you were more than friendly, with your motives hidden behind those insipid tales." "Enough," Hartley urged again, raising a hand. "Miss Worthington, you could be caught in a web of suspicion if you acted recklessly enough to confront Beatrice, as David has suggested. What do you have to say for yourself?" "Nothing, Inspector. I am innocent. But the truth is—" Clara paused, glancing nervously around the room. "Beatrice was considering abandoning a story I had shared with her. Perhaps she would have ruined my career. Or perhaps you feared she would expose you." Tyndall mused, eyes narrowing. In the final moment of tension, Hartley seized control. "Enough arguing. I believe I have the answer." He directed the assembly toward him, voice steady. "The bouquet, the scuffle in the garden, the whispering deceit, they all lead to one conclusion." He rested his gaze on Clara. "You did wish to protect your career, but I fear it was rooted deeper than that. You were involved with Beatrice's secret correspondence. This desperation led you to confront her, despite her warnings, and in that confrontation, emotions ran high. But if I am correct, it was the bouquet that sealed her fate, the struggle of loss against the backdrop of envy." It all fell silent, the room suspended in disbelief. "Clara," Hartley pressed, his voice dropping. "You did visit her, didn't you? You saw her with Tyndall, And in a moment of rage and despair, you struck back. You felt betrayed, and perhaps in that moment, you acted as an agent of fate. The realization painted the room in shadows of complicity. Clara's face turned pale, her lip quivering as she met his steady gaze. "I didn't mean to. I was just so angry. But I never—" She faltered, tears brimming. Tyndall shifted uneasily, looking from Clara to the inspector. "But how can one question a motive without proof? We must have more than mere conjectures." "Conjectures often reveal deeper truths," Hartley replied. "In the end, it will be the evidence that speaks volumes. We'll confirm what is needed, but the truth is that emotions, when unchecked, lead to ruin." Perhaps she genuinely feared that Beatrice's decisions would ruin her future. That's the truest underpinning of this tragedy. Clara's shoulders sagged in defeat, and with one last glance at the room, she whispered, "I didn't mean to take her life." The air thickened, and Inspector Hartley declared, "This tragedy has come full circle. Let the truth serve as a lesson. In the dance of life, it is not only the decisions we make, but how we handle our emotions that define our legacy." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting last light upon the drawn faces of the guests, the weight of Lady Beatrice Pemberton lingered in the air, a haunting reminder of the fragile lines that separate love, loss, and the ultimate price of envy. From that day forward, Willowbrook Manor would carry forth its secrets, but it would never again echo with the laughter of its notorious matron.